We have a great group of people with us today who can speak to the new models that integrate mental health and law enforcement that can impact responses to crisis. So the first person I want to bring to the stage is the Mayor of Baltimore, Maryland, Mr. Brandon Scott. Mayor Scott was first elected in 2020 and re-elected in 2024, a lifelong Baltimore resident and member of the Democratic Party. Mayor Scott previously served as City Council President. Thank you for being here, Mayor Scott.
Thank you, thank you.
Next person I want to bring to the stage is Ernest Stevens. Ernest Stevens is the Deputy Director of Law Enforcement for the Council of State Government's Justice Center. Ernie was a police officer for 28 years, and he's the author of the best-selling book, Mental Health and De-Escalation, a guide for law enforcement professionals. Thank you, Ernest, for being here with us today. Sheldon Smith Gray is a life skills instructor with Roca Baltimore, a nonprofit that seeks to reduce recidivism and violence by helping high-risk young men. His work involves intensive outreach, cognitive behavioral therapy, workforce development, and wraparound support in partnership with local organizations, including the Baltimore Police Department. Sheldon, thank you for being here, my brother.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, Dr. Rita Walker. Dr. Rita Walker is a clinical psychologist who has published more than 70 scientific papers on African-American mental health, suicide risk, and emotional resilience. She is the author of the best-selling book and one of my favorite books ever. Everybody should have it, The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health, and The Unapologetic Workbook, and she is a professor at the University of Houston. Dr. Walker, thank you for being here. Let's get right to it. Mayor Scott, Baltimore has had the distinction of being among the top 5 cities in America in terms of murder and violent crime. But in 2024, Baltimore saw a decline in murder with 201 murders recorded, the second lowest number in over 4 decades. Violent crime is down 20%, murders are down 26%, and non-fatal shootings are down 31%, according to the Baltimore police. Clearly positive change is happening. As mayor, what changes in how the police do their work are driving these impressive results in Baltimore?
Well, it's not just the police, Charlamagne. I think what we did is I laid out a vision that we were going to tackle public safety as a public health issue, and we were going to do that through a comprehensive violence reduction strategy that includes, but is not limited to, policing. Because for far too long in this country, we put the sole onus on solving and stopping and preventing and helping with crime on police. But when you look at what we're doing, right, our flagship program for reducing violence in Baltimore is the Group Violence Reduction Strategy, where we have police involved. But first and foremost, we identify people who are the most likely to be the victim or perpetrator of gun violence. Not every black person that lives in a neighborhood, not everyone, like they did when I was a kid, has to go to jail. We first go to them and say, we want you to stay alive. But the only way you can do that is if you change. And we do that with partners like Roca. And they get a letter from me as the mayor to say, I know who you are, I know what you do. If you are willing to change your life, we will help you with a job, mental health training, housing, job training, education, whatever. But if you don't, then you're going to hear from law enforcement. It's focusing our law enforcement on the actual people committing crimes, not everybody who lives in the neighborhood, focusing them on the actual guns that are coming into our communities, and also going after those companies. We were sued the nation's largest ghost gun company and won. Now we've seen ghost guns fall off a cliff, and we have now in 23 and 24 set records for reducing homicides in Baltimore, and also our historic investment into community violence intervention. All of it together is how we've done that, refocusing BPD, but also relying on the community and investing in community-based approaches.
Incredible, incredible. Sheldon, your work with Roca is part of Mayor Scott's comprehensive violence prevention program, but you first got involved with Roca as a participant. So tell us how that happened. What was your journey?
Man, Roca believes in relentless outreach, so...
You could tell he from Baltimore, right?
They believe in relentless outreach, so it was like they would knock on the door every day. Like every day they wouldn't give up. I even told them I lived next door, and they still would come. So it was more of a like they wouldn't give up on me. So I figured I had to give them like some sort of glory, some sort of respect out of that, them not giving up. So it started with that. And being a participant wasn't easy because I still wanted to be in the streets. Like I had big street dreams. Like I couldn't imagine doing this because where I come from. So it was like they never gave up on me. They were very relentless with me, and it paid off because I'm up here speaking with you.
You know, it's interesting because Mayor Scott said, you know, they had to go to people and basically say, you know, do you want to change your life? I don't feel like nobody wants to be in that condition, in that position. They just don't get provided the opportunity.
No, I would 100% agree with you. Nobody wants to change, but our thoughts have to be challenged. And that's what people like Mayor Scott and organizations like ROCA do. Like, we're going to challenge. You think you want to be outside? What about if this happens? Then what happens? Like, what goes on next? So it was more so they kind of put it in your face. Like, you saying you want to be in the streets, you want to do this, but what if we show you a whole nother way that you can still live your life as a member of society through ROCA or through the other GVIS programs?
So what was the moment you realized you wanted to be part of the solution and join ROCA?
Oh man, I knew this question would come, but I lost a best friend like 10, 15 feet away from me. And this was before my own situation, like 10, 15 feet away from me. He got shot, and the vice president of ROCA called me like 10 minutes later, just asking, like, are you okay? And I just knew, like, either I'm gonna die out here or I'm gonna go to jail forever. And I got a 13-year-old daughter. I can't go through that. Like, she can't go through that. So I knew it was time to change. And ROCA accepted me wanting to change.
How do you, Sheldon, understand the connection between mental health and the level of violence in places like Baltimore?
So to be honest, I didn't understand it at first. But with me being in the program ROCA, I had no choice but to understand that, like, sometimes we run off emotions. And that was my first hint of mental health, because I noticed I was an emotion-driven person. Like, if you say something to me wrong, I wanted to react. If you do something wrong, I wanted to react. But ROCA sat me down and showed me, like, take a second and breathe and think, is this person even saying it how you are taking it, or is this person doing it how, like, they just made me look at those things. So that was my first look at mental health. And now I'm more so like, we gotta make sure every young black man, no offense to any other race, but every young black man needs to know that it's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to say I'm going through something, or you need to be by yourself. So I just feel like with the programs we have that's already out here, we gotta address mental health more than we already do.
Absolutely. Dr. Rita Walker, crisis situations involving the police are often the last and, you know, unfortunate phase in untreated mental illness. Can you provide some context for the kinds of unmet mental health needs facing black communities?
I think one thing that's important for folks to know is that, you know, crisis doesn't just show up on Tuesday and everyone was fine Monday and Sunday and Saturday and every day before. Like, there's usually some sort of buildup. And it's important for folks to recognize, you know, anyone who's around the person who may be struggling, to recognize, like, they're not in a good place. And you know how you always say you never know what somebody's going through? I mean, that is a very real thing. And so that's why when we see folks kind of struggling a little bit, it's important to be able to put some kind of cushion around them, to let them know that they're not on their own, to be relentless. Because, yeah, the first time you offer help to someone, they may not be responsive because they don't even believe that you're trying to help them. But when you commit to providing support, then those individuals are less likely to encounter police because they're less likely to be in a crisis situation.
Are there messages and education we need to impart to communities about mental illness to empower people to seek treatment and services before those situations escalate?
Well, I think it starts with, and it's, you know, folks ask all the time, like, how do I know when somebody's in trouble? You may not necessarily know, but you do know oftentimes when someone has been through something. In the same way that you were saying that, you know, they knew that you lost your friend, and so someone reached out to you. When someone has lost a job, lost an important relationship, reach out and let them know that they're not on their own. That's something that we don't do very well in our society. You know, we might crack some jokes about them, but we don't sincerely reach out to folks and ask them, how are you doing? In the book, I introduced the idea of psychological fortitude and saying, well, just give me on a 0 to 10 rating, like just a number, 0 being awful and 10 being great. What's a number that you can give me for how you're doing? So then you circumvent that stuff where folks say, I'm fine, and they're really not. Or when they don't want you to get in their business. But if you give someone a rating, then that's able to say, okay, they're struggling right now, and maybe they don't want to talk about it, and that's completely fine. Let them know that I can be there for them however they need. Bring some food. You know, people are always hungry. You know, you don't have to do some sophisticated mental health care. For me, bring me some cupcakes. I like dessert. You know, like, take people what they need in order to address their basic needs of rest and food. You know, the kinds of things that support folks just every day.
Before we go to you, Ernest, I want to ask you, Mayor Scott, Is there somebody in Baltimore that people can call before they call law enforcement when somebody's having a mental health crisis?
So we actually are running one of the largest 911 diversion programs in the country. So sometimes when you call 911 and you're having a crisis, we have folks that work in our fire department and others that run that actually will disperse groups of crisis response people. We also have 988 where you can call that number and get that assistance. So we are ahead of the game, and even that's not enough because we're growing it. But we have to train up a whole new group of folks to be able to take those programs to scale to meet the need that we have out there today. But we've done a great job, and even for us within the police department, we have a crisis response team, officers that are specifically trained that way, and we're now also training our patrol officers to know how to deal with mental health. I actually saw an incident of it last weekend at a festival that we had in Baltimore where an officer de-escalated this young man from a situation and ended up him not going to jail, but us being able to get him the services that he need, get him home, he's homeless, get him all of those things that he need, which was a good thing to see because it wasn't that way when we were growing up as children.
Absolutely. Ernie, you were a police officer for 28 years. What did you learn during your career as a police officer that didn't work in crisis situations?
Well, first of all, I want to go back and visit just something real quick. Sheldon, you said that you lost your best friend? Stand up. And I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Like Doctor says, sometimes we say things, but we don't do things. So it's time we start changing things. What I learned very quick, well, I didn't learn it very quickly. I spent 28 years in law enforcement. In the first 15 years, I was part of the problem. Okay, I'm just going to put it out there. I was not the person you wanted responding to your house or to your home if somebody was in crisis. And I say that because I had not received training in what mental health truly was and how it presented. I got my training from television and what you saw on TV. So when you're ignorant about a subject, when you're uneducated about it, you truly don't provide a good service, right? You put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound and then you move on, it seems like. And it took me 15 years to figure that out until some training actually came into the San Antonio Police Department called Crisis Intervention Training, where I spent a week-long class learning about mental health and engaging with people that had mental health diagnoses. And as a result of that, I joined the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I made changes in my own life to implement good training and policy to have better outcomes. And you know what Mayor Scott said was he used words like focus on crime when it came to law enforcement. And I truly believe this now that I've been retired since 2021. Until we change, and I'm talking about law enforcement leaders and policymakers, until we change the definition of what safety is, and it's not the absence of crime, it must become the presence of well-being, we are going to be stuck in this rut. And I think I'm very thankful for leaders like Mayor Scott and others who have adopted this new definition of well-being because that's where their connection is made with community.
Thank you for your honesty. I got a question. How often do officers get mental health evaluations? Because you said you didn't even have the training, but what about when you're going through something emotionally? You might go into those communities and project onto those people.
Yeah, that's a great question. We were not required to have any mental health evaluations unless we were involved in a critical incident, and then we had to be cleared by a police staff psychologist. You know, for law enforcement, what many may not know or you may know is that you will go from call to call. And sometimes, and I was on a DWI unit for years, and I would go from one fatality to the next fatality. So it's seeing one or two deceased people to the next scene of one or two deceased people. And there's no time to decompress that because you got to get home and get to bed because now your overtime shift is coming up so you can go out and make extra money. And you compound that over a 20, 30-year career, and you see why the rate of suicide is the highest amongst first responders, is there is no way to reset. And law enforcement is starting to notice that. You're starting to see wellness programs and peer support programs to address these issues, but there's definitely room for improvement.
Man, let's stay there for a second. Mayor Scott, don't you think that should be necessary for officers to have their own mental health evaluation?
It is, but he hit the nail on the head. When you think about it's this switch, we've had this view of our law enforcement officers as this warrior mentality, and it's switching it to really a guardian kind of mentality. We have a wellness unit in BPD now that we've grown to be one of the nation's examples, and seeing the work that they do. It's not normal for someone to see people shot all the time. When you think about folks that work in units like that, or a homicide unit where that's all they do, right? Or when you go to a scene and there's some 6-year-old shot, or, we've had some incidents, I've had to dispatch them to other local departments who don't have that. We have to understand, because if you think about it like this, if I was in the Navy or the Marines, I get shipped in, I do my tour, I go out, right? But we allow these folks to literally see this all day, every day for 40 years and think that they're going to be okay without intervention. Having these wellness units is something that should be mandatory across the country.
Dr. Rita Walker, you want to add on to that?
Well, in everyday life, we just keep pushing, right? And so it just shows up sometimes in problematic ways in different professions. I certainly would advocate for everyone to have some mental health assessment, recognizing that first you have to be honest about where you are. But we don't like to talk about mental health like as a society. It's a really, really, really bad word. And so when we can start to normalize, we all need our minds, right? I think we would all assume that we need our brains to function. But yes, when you're exposed to things that are unnatural, regularly, it's going to shift your perspective, and that's understandable for anyone. But we have to start being honest about that as a society so that we can course correct.
Absolutely. Ernest, can you describe the model of de-escalation you came up with and how it connects to the mental health issues that are inherent in a lot of these crisis situations?
Yeah, so de-escalation, when I wrote the book, Mental Health and De-Escalation, I wrote it with the foundation of focusing on the person and not the problem. Right? A lot of times the problem, the call that you receive and you respond to, is something that's been emotionally charged, right? And it could be a very short-term incident, or it could have been something that has been building for quite some time. But if you can focus on the person and not the problem, then you can truly have a connection over correction, right? The correction would be very easily, okay, you need to go to seek treatment. I need to take you involuntarily because you're a danger to yourself or others, or because you've committed a crime, I've got to take you to jail because of family violence. And we're so quick to focus on correction that we fail to make a connection. And when you can do that, if you can focus on the person and that connection and build empathy, you're truly doing what you've been asked to do, and that is to serve your community in a manner that really translates humanity. And when we did the training for the San Antonio Police Department, we used best practices from around the country, models that the FBI gave us for as far as active listening, other de-escalation methods that other negotiator teams or agencies were using, and then we listened to the community. We invited the community to the training and said, how would you like us to respond to you or your loved one? What do you expect the officers to do, and what kind of outcomes do you want to see? Because we want to avoid as many negative outcomes as possible. So it really was bringing the community in to be part of the conversation so we could find the solution.
Is there any solution, Ernest, for the mental health issue called racism?
Wow, that is an excellent question. I wish I had an answer to that. But until we really do cultural competency, I think when you're building out these programs and putting together either disciplinary teams or working with your community stakeholders, your local mental health authority, it can't just be on the police. It has to be on your collaborators to help build that cultural competency, to make sure that you have the resources in place to meet the needs of everybody in your community. That's the point I think we need to get to.
Mayor Scott, what kind of approaches in policing are you advocating for that recognize the need to integrate mental health considerations into police interventions in these crisis situations?
Well, we've talked about a bunch of them already. One, I think every police department across the country should have extensive training in dealing with that. Every police department should have a crisis response team. Every city should have a 911 diversion program. It shouldn't be an optional thing because, again, we have to stop sending police officers lights and sirens to something that is not their responsibility, right? When I want a fire put out, I don't call the police, I call the fire department. But we are sending, and think about it for me, Charlamagne, I am the city that has the best hospital in the world, Johns Hopkins right there. And my understanding of why we needed to do this at this level actually came from a good friend of mine, a former major in the police department, Lloyd Wells, who said to me one night, like, Brandon, I don't understand. I'm like, what's up? He said, why am I, the major of the Eastern District of Baltimore City, sending my patrol officers, lights and sirens to a mental health issue, and Johns Hopkins hospital system is in my district? Right? If anybody can do it, we can do it. We have to do that because those approaches save lives, but more importantly, it allows police officers to focus on what everyone says they want them to be focused on, right? People that we need to hold accountable for bringing guns into the community, shooting people, robbing people. When I came into office, I had my former police commissioner check. I said, Paul, I want to know what's the percentage of calls that come into 911, which is supposed to be emergencies, that are not emergency. He said 80%. 80% were non-emergencies. Things as simple as back then, my kid won't log into Zoom to go to school. My husband is cheating on me on Facebook. The band is practicing outside. My neighbor is yelling and screaming all day, right? That's not for them to handle. And we've allowed ourselves to culturally move into this point where if I don't like it, I call the police and they move it. And what comes from that is situations that so many of us have lived in, right? For me, myself, I always tell folks it is a nothing but sure luck and the grace of God that I never went to jail. Because 7 times from the time I was 14 until I was 22 years old, I came to City Hall at 23, right? I was set down in handcuffs just because I was in my neighborhood, right? And one time I was this close. And the only reason I didn't go to jail is that my friend went in the house and got my dad, and my dad said to the officer, I just want you to know that this is so-and-so's nephew, and it just happens to be one of my dad's friends, one of the most well-respected police officers that worked, black police officers that worked in BPD at the time. He took his handcuffs off, let me go. But we keep creating these situations, and we have to talk about that as a community, right? People that live across the street from parks. The kids are out there playing, I don't like it, 911. We have to change that mentality and invest in all of these things that we know works. We have to put circles on circles, squares on squares, not keep ramming public safety policing as the only solution to all these other issues.
So, Mayor Scott, if somebody's husband is cheating on them on Facebook, who do they call?
So everyone's laughing. But I just happen to be, as you know, the subject of now 2 documentaries. One called Charm City, where you can see this happen live, so you can look at it on Prime. A lady calls 911 and literally has a police officer with her phone. This is it. How can you help me with that, right? Like, that's not what you should be doing. That is something, we have places like in Baltimore, the Community Mediation Center, where you can call for free and get these kind of issues mediated to let you get to the point where you want to work with divorce or things like that. That's the kind of things that we have to build up in community, because you shouldn't be calling the police for something that simple.
You know, Charlamagne, something he said that he didn't say that I hope will resonate was 80% of the calls don't need a police officer, but 80% of those calls that they're going to are going to involve a gun, right? The officer's gun. That's why you're seeing some of these negative outcomes. And I think that's something that really needs to be studied and researched, and these calls need to be triaged better to make sure that the right response is getting the proper outcome.
And I caught a lot of flack because through that work, we created this smart policing program where we divert some of those. And some of these calls, we now tell them, like, you're not getting a live body officer for that. We're going to take that report either over the phone or you can file it online. For example, if I wake up and my car is gone, right? Well, the car's not home. Why are we sending someone lights and sirens to the house so we know the car isn't? When every car after 2012 has what? A GPS. We have license plate readers. We can actually find the car faster. Or someone stole my package, or they bust my window out on my car. You just need to report so you can go to work. We have to change the way that we do these things, and it's going to require a lot of courage and leadership to do them, because whether it's this, whether it's creating a comprehensive violence reduction strategy using community violence intervention, when you do that originally as a mayor, a local leader, governor, whoever, it's not going to be very popular. But you're there to do the right thing, not the popular thing. And the popular thing is almost always the wrong thing to do.
Word. Sheldon, how do you understand the connection between mental health and the level of violence in a city like Baltimore?
I feel like Doc touched on it, the basic needs. Like if young men have their basic needs met, it's likely that they won't go out here and break the law. So it's like you gotta talk to them. That's another thing. Like with mental health, you won't know what's going on if you don't ask somebody, are they okay? Or like Ernie just did, like give me a hug, because that hug you might can tell from the hug. Like, so you just gotta be more hands-on to even know that someone is going through something, and know that it's a mental health issue, because if you're not talking to them, you might just think this is an angry young man or a sad young man, or you might cover it up. Because when I was younger, I used to just like try to make people laugh. And in reality, it's a bunch of stuff going on in my head. Like it's eating me up, but I'm like, if I make this person laugh, they got no choice but to think I'm okay. So we just gotta be more hands-on with the whole mental health thing. We gotta ask these young men and young women, what's going on? Are you okay? Do you need a hug? Are your basic needs met?
Now that you know the language and you have a better understanding of it, can you describe how you address the mental health needs of the young men you work with?
Another thing Doc touched on, my nickname is Snacks. So
you got a pocket full of Reese's Pieces or something?
I was so worried I was going to say it earlier without your permission.
Usually if I can see something is going on, yo, you hungry?
Word.
That's the first thing I'm going to ask. Because a person will open up over food, especially if you get them their favorite food. Like, I've learned that. Like,
You're not yourself when you're hungry. Snickers has made millions off it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Snickers making money off of it, and it's real. But it's like, if I ask this young man, is he hungry, and he says yes, once he start eating, I can ask him anything. Like, he's going to open up no matter what. What's going on at home? How's your mother doing? How's your baby mother doing? Whoever it is, if it's you, like, it's like, how are you doing? That food is the first door. So my first initial thing with mental health is either are you okay or are you hungry, and I go from there.
How do you change these young men's attitudes about violence? Because, you know, that's just seems so natural, like it's on sight. Everybody got ops, you know. How do you change their attitudes about violence?
I let them know it's bigger than us. Me, myself, I was shot last year in May, and I lost my cousin, like, in my arms. I never begged anybody for anything in my life, but I begged my cousin not to die.
Damn.
And once he passed, of course, I thought negative thoughts, retaliation, let's go. Like you said, it's on site. I see these guys, it's on site. But then I remembered, I work for Roka. If I go mess up, I'm giving all the young men I service a segue to say, he did it. It's bigger than us. Like, the part I play is just trying to get young men to know that you are worth something. Your mother loves you, your father loves you, your homeboy, somebody loves you. You don't have to go out here and risk your life. And 9 times out of 10, it's pride. Like, I've learned in myself, I don't care what nobody think no more. Now, me being honest with all these people in the room, if this situation would have happened 10 years ago, it would have been a different outcome. But the things I've learned from Roka, just being places like this, it's not worth it. Because I watched my cousin die. I know my family don't want to go through that twice over. So it's like, it's bigger than us. I gotta let the young men know, like, you're loved, and it's much bigger than us. We got work to do. One of the first things I said in the hospital was, we got work to do, because some young guys shot me. So it was like, whole time I probably could have saved them. It's the first thing I thought. Like, basic needs. Maybe they didn't have what they needed to have, so they thought, let's take it out here by shooting. It's easy to shoot somebody. Like, everywhere in the country it's easy to get a gun for young men. We see it on social media, music video. It's easy. So it's like, now it's like they ain't fighting no more. They're going straight to violence. And that's a mental health issue, because when we was coming up, you had to fight. And you had to fight. Like, your mother was, you're not coming back in here till you handle that. Like, that's what it was. But that aspect has gone. So now they just straight the real violence.
Yeah, because if I lose, it's going to get viewed on YouTube 5 million times.
And now your pride being attacked. You could be the toughest guy and lost that day. Now they're attacking your pride.
If you don't mind me asking, how have you been dealing with the grief?
So grief, everybody out here done lost somebody. Grief is tricky. I'm going to be honest with you and say grief is tricky. Some days I'm good, some days I'm not. But doing the work I do, I know that, like, it'll get better, like, with time, especially if I keep doing what I'm doing. But some days it's like I don't want to talk. Some days I just miss my cousin. Like, I close my eyes and just the day of play from the beginning. And I just be a little, like, sad, but I know he wouldn't want me to be sad. We graduated Roker together. So, like, if anything, I got to keep going for him, because my goal was to get him to work right next to me. And now that he gone, I got to work twice as hard. And the grief probably won't go nowhere, but like I said, it's bigger than us. We got to put that to the side and save these young men and women. That's my biggest thing. Like, even with what happened to me, I want to save more people, especially in Baltimore, because we got a funny narrative on our city that it's violence, this, that, the third, drug. But in reality, it's a good city, and we got good people trying to put that on the forefront. But, you know, the negative usually gets the bigger light.
Dr. Rita Walker, when you hear a story like Snacks, what goes through your mind?
On the one hand, it can feel heartbreaking, but on the other hand, I'm inspired. You know, when I hear Sheldon talk about, like, yeah, real talk, some days are tough. And that's what grief is, and that's on a lot of level what mental health is. Like, everyone doesn't feel good every day. You know, we have tough days. At the same time, it's also important to, one, recognize, okay, today is the toughest day. I need to do something different. I might need to stay home. I might need to get some candy. I might need to get some snacks. And then other days, you say, I'm ready to fight, you know, and you go out there and you do what you need to do. And so it's important for folks to recognize the part that is, yes, it's bigger than me. And for me as a person of faith, like, that's what inspires me a lot. I know God put me here for a reason, but then I also have to recognize, you know, what are my individual talents and what are my individual strengths? For people who are struggling, oftentimes, they don't think they're good at anything. They don't think they make any contribution. And so after they have some food, then maybe ask them about, you know, like, what are the things that you're good at? Don't ask about the problem. Don't ask about the things that make them feel bad. Remind them about the things that make them good and special. And I can't tell you all how many clients, you know, we've seen over the years who are depressed, who are anxious, and you ask them about what are the things that they're good at, that they do well. And they're like, do well? Like there really isn't anything that they can access. But we give them time, and then they're able to figure out, like, this is my contribution. This is the thing that I can focus on, because I wouldn't know what that was unless I create space for them to be able to figure that out for themselves. So on the one hand, it's hard to have to go through stuff. And we've talked a little bit about this. Like, it's hard. But when we can recognize, what is the pivot point in this? What is my next step? And if I can't take the step today, maybe I can take it next week or next month. That's the part that's grace. Like, you don't have to do everything right now, but be on the lookout for what the opportunity is to create success.
Let's stay there for a second. How does stigma paralyze people as it relates to mental health treatment?
Oh my goodness, stigma. Well, I hope we're breaking some of it today with this conversation, but stigma is basically misinformation, and it's usually not good information. You know, it's misinformation that is not helpful, that deters people from getting answers and solutions that make sense. It creates narratives for folks. As an example, when we talk about mental health, I've heard people say, well, I'm not having a nervous breakdown, so I'm okay. That's not really the definition of mental health. And then there are other folks who assume that, you know, if they can't get out of bed, or maybe they're seeing things that they see things, that people who see things that aren't there or hear things that aren't there, that those folks are crazy, so to speak. Well, mental health exists on a continuum. And that continuum can look like really low days, but we all have low days. Now, when it starts to look like days and weeks and months, then that's a problem. And so we have to start to circumvent stigma by filling in the appropriate and accurate information with experts, because what happens is a lot of folks are in TikTok, and we get our TikTok mental health, and those folks oftentimes aren't the professionals. And so, unfortunately, I do think that a lot of professionals have a hard time kind of translating to, you know, everyday audiences. That's one reason I wrote The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health, because we need to be able to infuse the misinformation, sidestep the misinformation, and add information that's going to be more helpful and more impactful, so that people can make sense of what this mental health mystery is.
So instead of going to the TikTok therapist, what alternatives or ways of integrating mental health services do you think would be most valuable, Dr. Walker?
Well, I think you have asked a good question earlier, with regard to making sure that the folks who are the first responders are themselves in their right mind. Like, that is so unfair for me to assume that someone who maybe just dealt with loss, or maybe someone who's dealing with maybe a recent cancer diagnosis, or yes, maybe someone who was just on a call that was a homicide or suicide homicide, and expect that person to just pick up and carry on. Like, that's not reasonable by any stretch of the imagination. And so we need to be able to make sure that the people who are taking care, the people who are the caregivers, that they themselves are okay, and that someone is checking in on them. I think I might have missed the first part of the question, so if I missed it, let me know.
Well, I asked you what are some other alternatives for people who are, like, you go on TikTok and you might get diagnosed with something, or you think you're getting diagnosed with something. What are some other alternatives?
Well, for people who think they might have something, talk to a professional. Like, it's not that hard to at least reach out to someone who is a licensed professional. Let me add licensed mental health professional, so LPC, PhD as an example. Reach out to them, because those folks have the tools to engage in assessment. We don't want for folks to say, okay, I have the diagnosis, or I have, this is what I have, and hope for the best. Like, talk to someone, get an accurate diagnosis, and then figure out what the plan is. And there was something else that I wanted to come back to with regard to 988. So how many folks, by show of hands, are familiar with 988? So it's a good proportion of folks, but a lot of folks are like, 988, what is that? So that's a mental health crisis alternative. So someone is in crisis, maybe they had too much to drink and they're acting a little bit like, not so sure what's going on. The person who sees that can call 988. It doesn't have to be you who's struggling, but you see someone else and you call 988, explain who you are. I'm a bystander, or I'm a family member, whoever you are. This is what I see. Tell me what to do next. Help me walk this person, if it's going to be you, through the crisis. And 988 is trained professionals who are there for this purpose. They were established, I think maybe I've lost track of time, just a few years ago, but it's an easy number to remember, 988. And you call and you can get help, and it doesn't have to be someone who is necessarily suicidal, though they may be suicidal, and those experts can in fact help. And I think it's important for people to be familiar with 988.
Ernest, can we talk about, can you describe the reaction your proposals have received, not only from heads of police departments, but from officers that are actually on the beat now?
Yeah, I think that it's being accepted widely with law enforcement, because for way too long, they have not received the tools they've needed to be able to do a good job responding to family members in crisis. Like I said, I was one of the ones you did not want to come to your house. And I don't say that because I'm ashamed of it. I say it because I'm proud of where I'm at now. And that's because I've taken the time to get educated, taken the time to join organizations that bring to light the reality of what it's like to live with somebody that has a mental health diagnosis, and what the day in and day out lifestyle is, and what we can do to be a part of that solution. And a lot of it is, you have to understand what you're dealing with. In the documentary, Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, it focused on us in our approach to people in a mental health crisis. And what we did was we changed the narrative. Instead of showing up in a police car, in a police uniform, and if you look at the way the police uniforms are now, I mean, they carry outer carry vests, because they're easy to take off and you cool down a little bit quicker. But on those outer carry vests, you see handcuffs and magazines to AR-15s and radios and fishing lures and whatever else they can stick on there, right? But it's intimidating. So we changed the narrative, and we showed up in an unmarked car, in plain clothes, looking like I didn't dress this nice, that's for sure, but we would just walk up and identify ourselves. Hey, we're with the police department, with the crisis intervention team, but we're here to listen. We're here to listen to you. How can we help together as a team get you in a better place? And I think when you slow it down, when you slow the narrative down, and you understand what you're dealing with, you're going to have better outcomes. That's why I think the film was so impactful, and it reached and touched so many communities that law enforcement agencies began to stand up mental health units and began to collaborate with local health providers or mental health authorities to create these collaborative efforts.
I like the idea of your proposals because they challenge traditional models of policing, and they address the role mental health plays in crisis situations. But I do wonder, can those proposals truly work if we if the officers themselves aren't getting proper mental health evaluations.
Yeah,
I just want to keep. When you said that they don't, it kind of like just bugged me out a little bit because I feel like none of this stuff could truly work if they're not getting proper mental health evaluations.
Yeah, no, you're right. And until police leadership makes that a priority within the departments, and you use a trauma-informed care approach within these police agencies, and you're teaching it at the yearly in-service and making help available. A lot of agencies, they will have an insurance program that has an EAP, but there's not very many police officers that I have talked to in my circles that said, yeah, I would never want to go to the EAP. They don't do anything, they don't help, they don't understand, they're not police officers, they don't know. So it's, are you resourcing culturally competent individuals, therapists, social workers, clinical social workers to meet the officers in their time of needs? If you look at the way EMS responds to a call, they will always put on rubber gloves before they show up, right? Because they assume they're going to encounter somebody with a communicable disease. Well, if officers would just put that rubber glove up around their brain to think that I'm going to respond to somebody that has unprocessed trauma, then we can have better outcomes. And I think that's part of the training that we get, and that's part of the strides we need to continue to make.
What are some of the challenges of making that switch for the officers and for the public?
Well, for the officers, it's adequate resources. If you look at law enforcement as a nation, 80% of law enforcement agencies are 50 officers or less. So a lot of these are rural agencies that just don't have the resources. I mean, they're still pen to paper, no computers in the car, pulling out their map book, trying to figure out where to go. So for law enforcement, it's adequate resources. For the community, I think there's not a real good collaboration between law enforcement and community. And until we continue to have these conversations and we all come to an equal table, nobody's in charge of this table to say, how do we get to a better place as a community? Look at what they're doing in Baltimore, and look at their diversion. And you have to be able to provide resources to the community that don't always include sending a law enforcement officer to a call that they really don't need to go to. So it's coming together, it's redefining safety, and it's truly trying to lift up a community.
Mayor Scott, can you describe how community mental health resources can be applied to reduce violence and violent interactions with police?
Well, I think, listen, Snacks has already laid it out. When you think about this approach that we have and getting folks, if they're a GVRS participant, getting them, and by the way, people in GVRS, we've only had a 3% recidivism rate and only a 5% re-victimization rate for all of those folks that we focused on. But you have to get them there. And to get these young men and young women to the position where we need them to be able to be the best and better version of themselves, we have to deal with the mind first. And when we provide those services, for us, we're grateful to have so many great partners in Baltimore. Sometimes it's grief counseling, right? We have a great partner in Roberta's house who helped so many of our folks deal with grief. We have folks that are working on whatever mental health issue those people are facing, and then that unlocks the ability for us to connect them to employment, either through ROCA connecting them or the city connecting them. There are so many of our participants now that are working for me in public works, at my convention center, so many of these things, but we have to first unlock that, because when we do that, we know every time we get one of these people in a better spot, we're literally saving lives, because once that ball starts, you never know when it's going to stop.
I agree. We have to deal with the minds of the people in our communities. But, and I asked this earlier, but I want to ask you, how do you deal with the minds of just a racist police officer?
Well, I think that the truth is that for me, when we find out folks are that way, we just got to get rid of them, right? We can't have those folks in there. We just can't do that.
Sometimes
right?
It's too late then.
Sometimes it's too late, right? There's no doubt. Sometimes it's too late. But it's also about change. When you change the way that you're recruiting, when you change the way what you want to have, what they're going to be doing, right? You can see that. And sometimes you see that in this play out where some folks who may have been around for a long time disagree with some of the changes. And change is hard. For us, there was at the beginning of our consent decree and reform efforts, everyone saying you can't do these reform things because crime is going to go up. Well, we have been reforming, and we've reduced crime to its lowest point in a generation, right, in my lifetime. You have to prove those people wrong, and then you have to have those examples and long-standing things of how it's going to sustain. What we're doing works. GVRS works. Community violent intervention works, and we have to continue to fund it and not let folks distract us, because that's how that stuff creeps back in. But you also have to hold people accountable, whether they are a police officer, a firefighter, a public official like myself, some regular yo on the street. Everybody has to be treated with that same level of accountability, and that's how we've been able to build what we've built in Baltimore. And if you want to see it more in depth, you can look at The Body Politic. It's an Emmy-nominated documentary that talks about that. But that's how you do it. You have to do it that way.
We have less than a minute left, so I just want to get some final thoughts from the panel. Ernest?
Yeah, well, I want to continue to have these conversations. I want to continue to use platforms like this to uplift the conversation and bring community and law enforcement together so we can continue to work towards positive outcomes.
Snacks? Sheldon, I'm sorry.
For me, I'm also, like Ernest, want to keep having these conversations, but Doctor asked me a great question, like, what if I was to get $1 million, like, what would I do now? And I was like, I honestly would probably try to put ROCA in at least 25 of the 50 states, because I know it worked. I know how I was before this. Like, there's no way I'm supposed to be up here talking to y'all. That's me being honest to y'all. Like, it's no way. So I know how I was, and I know the things I went through, and I know all the thoughts I had. So it's like, we just got to keep pushing this message, having these conversations, and just keep doing the work, the hands-on work. It's easy to sit behind, like, this is my mayor. Like, I've been places with him. He's actually out here. I don't know if other mayors do that, but, like, we just need more people like him, more people like the people on the stage and in this room to keep pushing this message, and just don't give up on us as young black people.
That's right. Dr. Rita Walker, I want you to leave us with a call to action. Just a call to action. What do you think people should do? What do you think we should do after hearing this conversation?
I think everyone in this room can focus on being maybe a little bit more curious about the people around them. And so what happens a lot of times is we make, snap judgments, very quickly we assume we know what someone's going through, who they are, everything about their lives. But instead, be curious about people. Ask them questions about, like, where are you going when you leave here? What were you doing before you got here? What'd you eat? Ask them questions about their family. Get to know people, because what we don't have a lot of that we need more of is relationship and connection to one another, to be able to see individuals as humans. And so when we can do that, I think that we do start to limit the day-to-day crisis that people experience that can escalate into something that is much more serious. And of course, download a copy of The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health.
I'm telling you, one of the greatest books I've ever read. Everybody should have that in their house. Make some noise for Mayor Brandon Scott. Make some noise for Ernest Stevens. Make some noise for Sheldon Gray Smith and Dr. Rita Walker, y'all. Y'all have a great day.